Welcome to another episode of A Glass with Billy. We have Mogu Mogu.
Mogu Mogu.
Oh, it's so good.
Isn't it?
Oh, and our guest today is Forrest.
Forrest.
And we are in a...
Forest. Oh.
I heard you like forests, so I put a forest in your forest. Obviously, the earlier you start Korean is better.
Obviously, I guess, like, you know, learning as a child, right? As a baby, right? Our first language, for example, we don't learn it. We actually like acquire. There's not much learning going on. We're just absorb, right? And just take in, you know, all the sounds and...
So then when is too late?
Too late? Technically.
Okay, wait. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, if you're starting as an adult, we're going to be talking about how much of a disadvantage or actually how much of an advantage do you have compared to someone who's starting as a child or maybe even as a teenager. But first, there's something we have to talk about that's, I think you need to know as a base before we get into everything, and that is the critical language hypothesis. What is that?
Or just the critical hypothesis. It basically believes that once you reach a certain age, you can't learn a language.
Right.
This actually kind of comes from psychology. I actually don't know if the hypothesis necessarily came from psych, but there is a similar one in psychology when it comes to cognitive development. So do you know, like, I think it was Jeannie, right? She was like locked in a room. Like
I did learn. I did learn about this.
This is like in every general psych course. She basically spoke like an animal, right?
This was, for context, this was a girl who had been like raised by being locked in her room, essentially.
Like, it's a very extreme case, right? But it made us realize that once you pass that critical period, right, cognitively, right, and language comes from our cognitive development, right? If you miss that age, then basically Jeannie was only able to really understand very little and communicate very little, right? So when it comes to language learning or acquisition, right, for a second language, it can be more advantageous, right, for younger learners because they just absorb more, right? They don't have like a schema either, right? So like a schema is where in our brain, it's like where we store all of our like prior knowledge. Say there's a bear. Okay, maybe bear's a bad example. There's a cat. Usually there's cats in the video because there's campus cats. So say there's
a cat.
So you see a cat, you have no schema of the cat. So basically that means you have no visual idea of what a cat is like. But then someone tells you, oh, that's a cat. Then you're like, oh, cat. Okay. That's where your schema for a cat starts, and then you develop it. So for children, they don't really have that. So that's why it's easier for them to kind of pick up on languages.
The age, though, I'll say for this hypothesis, it's not really settled, but it'll be somewhere from between the ages of 2 and 3 up until the early teenage years. So sometime in between there, something happens that makes it so people are no longer able to learn a foreign language well. And it's controversial. Now, the first thing you might be thinking about when I'm saying this is, well, I know so-and-so, this Korean person who speaks English very well, and they didn't even start learning it, and they say until they were in college or until they were an adult. If you know someone who speaks English at a high level, there's actually a pretty high chance that they actually have been exposed to English and learning English from childhood. At least for all of Koreans, especially for the past, I don't know how many decades.
Like after the Korean War and everything, like...
pretty much everyone has been doing English education. It's a big difference between someone who starts learning Korean.
Well, and they're totally different languages as well, like in terms of the world. But Korean is a little bit different still, right? Like obviously it's become more popular and you have more people learning from a younger age, but it's very unlikely for the majority of learners where they're gonna like learn from like elementary school, right?
No, but in this video, we're not only gonna be presenting our opinions. The main reason I wanted to make this video is to talk about a study from the year 2000, and this is an important study which actually tested the hypotheses, is that the plural for hypothesis? I think, of several previous studies at once. So the first topic we're gonna talk about is, when is the earliest age that you can use self-study to learn Korean? What would be self-study?
So self-study is just what I did. You also kind of
self-study,
well, right? You decide what you're going to use to study, right? Like, sure, you can use a textbook, but basically you are your teacher. Compared to like a classroom, traditional language, classroom, where you have a textbook, you learn very general, basic like phrases, right?
And they tell you what you're going to be doing the next day.
Yeah.
So can babies do this? Can babies learn Korean by self-study?
Obviously, no.
Can babies follow textbooks or grammar lessons or lectures? Should I buy a baby Korean made simple, like a 2-year-old? Did you see those commercials for, what was it, Baby Einstein or whatever?
Oh, yeah.
So, oh my goodness.
Baby Einstein.
There's that annoying jingle. So little babies, young children cannot do this.
Yes. Okay, I think a good example, or like a good comparison for it is like thinking of like giving your, like say you give Jeremy like a math textbook for just like addition and subtraction.
Okay.
And you're just like, okay, do it. Obviously.
Maybe some like genius, like
yeah.
maybe Jimmy Neutron could probably do this.
Jimmy Neutron could
do this.
Yeah.
He's smart. I love him.
But he's not Jimmy Neutron.
He's not Jimmy Neutron level. Children learn better than like implicitly.
Yes.
So that would be like without trying.
Yeah.
And then kids will learn through just doing like total immersion, like all day.
Yeah.
So not just like 30 minutes a day, but all day, like 24 hours a day. But then why can't adults do this?
Well, kind of like what you said.
Okay.
Yeah.
Adults can use textbooks.
Yeah.
They can follow logic to connect things together. They can also stay disciplined.
They just have intrinsic motivation usually. I mean, obviously they might have some extrinsic, like I also learned for school, right? That's not really, it was intrinsic.
Yeah.
But I also had to like force myself to study for TOPIK.
So then going back to the study that I mentioned from 2000, according to the study, the first thing is adults must learn languages through studying or practicing and thinking, and are unable to learn implicitly the way that children learn. So then what's the earliest age, again back to our question, what's the earliest age then that someone could learn by self-study? Pause the video, what do you think? And you can write it in the comments.
Obviously, there's not a specific one single age. I think some people could even start a little bit earlier, but it would depend on their cognitive development and how disciplined they are in their own like just regular school studies as well. So I would say, especially like around high school, like from freshman year. So maybe like from sophomore year and onwards.
Okay.
I think it would be okay.
So you want to know what the study says?
Yes.
So in the study, they found that this happens gradually, but between the ages of around 6 or 7 and 16 to 17. So there's a 10-year period over that time that gradually something changes in our brain that makes it impossible for us to learn the same way as a child anymore. We lose something. So then I guess the latest age that someone can start learning a foreign language to get to a near native level is going to be 16, 17.
Yeah, which is sophomore-ish age.
Yeah, I started learning later than that. You started learning later than that.
I was like 21 or something.
Beyond that though, it doesn't really make much difference how old someone is when they start. They actually tested someone who was 81 years old.
Do you ever get people that ask you like, oh, am I too old to learn?
Yeah.
Like, is there any hope for me?
Right.
Or is there no hope?
Sometimes I'll get emails from people in their 50s or 60s or even 70s, and they'll ask me like, is it too late? And the answer, well, I've always told them, no, you can do it, but this study as well would confirm, no. Yeah. You can do it at least up to 81. Now if you're 82, I can't help you. They haven't tested that.
It would really depend too if they've had success in learning another language before. So if they have that, I think it's totally possible. For me, for example, before I even started Korean, like because I took Spanish from like kindergarten all the way to like sophomore year of high school, and I couldn't speak a single word, like besides the basic phrases that
Donde está el biblioteca?
Like that was all I could do. So after that experience, I was just like, I guess I'm like a language failure. Like I can't learn languages, right? But then, when I finally started learning Korean, it was like a whole different approach. I had way more intrinsic motivation, right? It came way more easily to me. But we were actually talking like the other day. Now it's kind of funny because Spanish seems easier to me now. Even words that I don't even know, like I'm able to just through the word, some of the words that are obviously like we use in English as well, right? I can use that in the context and like figure out the new word like really easily. So it's like I've also improved in terms of like my, sort of like linguistic knowledge as well, right? Adult learners, really rely on their schema, right? They really rely on that prior knowledge to use that to build onto learning new things, right? But if they don't have that prior knowledge of like learning a different language or learning about different cultures and like things like that, then it's going to be even harder for them as a older learner to like understand, those new things, right?
So there are 4 major reasons that are provided as possible for why this happens. One of them being adults are self-conscious. We don't want to be seen making mistakes, and we don't want to be seen as being like a beginner at something.
True. In terms of motivation, right? Like usually you're learning a language, especially like for a career opportunity or something like that too, right? So it kind of, it just deals with intelligence sort of, right?
Yeah, you want to be able to show you can do this.
Yeah.
Okay, another reason we kind of hinted on it is adults just learn in a different way.
Yeah.
So we have different ways of thinking than kids.
Yeah. I've also taught, like first graders, like English, right? And it's like they obviously absorb what I'm teaching, or not really teaching them, like exposing them to a lot faster compared to my adult learners. But then if I point out something that's wrong, a lot of times it's hard for them to like be like, oh, because of like this grammar, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's past tense, right? They're still trying to understand past tense in their native language, right?
Another reason is, well, adults simply cannot do as much immersion as children, no matter how hard we try. I know there are some people who try to learn Korean like solely through immersion.
Yeah.
And let's just say, for example, someone has gotten 10,000 hours.
10,000 hours.
10,000 hours of Korean listening, which is a lot of time.
Yeah.
You'd have to do like hours and hours a day.
And that's like the number that they usually use for like, you need 10,000 hours to master whatever,
sure, yeah,
right?
10,000 hours to master a skill or something.
Yeah.
But even 10,000 hours of listening practice is a drop in the pool for any Korean-speaking child. Like I'm thinking, if you're awake 12 hours a day, actually let me calculate that. Let's see, how long would that take? So 12 times 365 days. So by the time you are, let's say 5 years old, you've gotten 21,000 hours, and a 5-year-old does not speak very great. They can put sentences together, but they're not like fluent.
I think there's a lot of learners out there too that are very like, we get it asked all the time in the server, I think. They're like, oh, how many hours or how many weeks or years or months, does it take to learn Korean? There's so many variables to consider. So time is not really the issue.
And there's something we can add to that as well. According to the study, which also tested this, they did a measure of people who had gotten a lot of listening practice as adults. And they said that even adults who do get tons and tons of input, listening practice, even in those cases, adults still don't reach those same near native levels. And then there's one more reason. The study also mentioned it's possible that because adults have less neurological plasticity, so the brain's ability to change.
Yes.
But the study doesn't give a conclusion. They don't know the reason why. It could be a combination of these, or it could be nothing of.
It's most likely
it could be
a lot of
else.
them.
So we talked about then what's the earliest age you can start learning through self-study, and we also talked about what age range you kind of lose the ability to learn like a child. But then the next question is then, what is the best age to learn Korean through self-study? So what do you think?
I would say anywhere from like obviously like 15, 16 or whatever, right?
As soon as you can start doing self-study is going to be the best age to learn Korean by self-study. So then, that'll depend on the person. But if you miss that 16, 17 age limit, then you're still fine?
Yeah, you're fine. And, there's always those people where they started maybe even at 16 or 17 and then preparing for college. Like that gets in the way, so you can't study anymore.
Yeah.
And then they get used to college and then they're like, oh, I have some more time, right? Maybe I should study
Korean again,
Yeah. Okay. But I think an important thing to mention is when that happens, go back and review.
Yeah, yeah. And the study also talked about not specifically that, but just starting to learn as an adult. They showed that even people who started from adult ages were still able to reach fluent levels.
Yeah.
And some of them also, who started as adult, were still able to reach near native levels. So despite what the study says, where you can't reach that near native level past the ages of 16, 17-ish, there were some exceptions to that. These were adults that they listed as high aptitude learners.
Yeah, so that is a key point. Do you know what it means?
Smart?
It's a little bit different.
Okay.
It's not specifically like smart in terms of like, oh, they're really good at math. They have a high aptitude for learning language. The Defense Language Institute,
Okay.
it's usually DLI, there's a longer one. They rank, how hard or how difficult,
Right.
Certain languages
That's
are.
that's where people will say, oh, they rank the Korean and Japanese
Yeah.
as the hardest languages, and the other ones are like level 4, level 3.
Yeah. So like if you score really, really high, then you're gonna like learn Korean or Japanese, whatever else is up there.
Yeah.
I always forget. And so basically that's what they're saying here.
Okay.
Essentially they have a high aptitude for language learning.
Yeah, because they also did mention in the study that the high aptitude has nothing to do with how many years of school that someone did.
Yeah.
So it's not like, oh, this person went to Harvard.
Yeah, or
So-
it's not like they just gathered a bunch of people from like STEM or something, right?
And for those people, they showed that they had a higher chance of reaching more of a near native level.
Yeah.
So basically, if you are a high aptitude learner, then really don't worry about when you start. You're going to be fine.
Yeah, so near native is more attainable, whereas fluency is basically attainable for pretty much everyone.
Yeah.
Like obviously you still make mistakes.
No, but
yeah.
you're talking with someone and they sound like they understand what you're
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
and you understand what they're saying. That's fluent.
Yeah, yeah.
I've seen people start 30s, 40s, like totally normal 50s. There was a guy who was 70, I heard,
Oh,
who
wow.
was doing Korean and still could have conversations. I was thinking in my case, and in your case also, we started past what this study says would be the cutoff date.
Yeah.
I'm definitely fluent.
Yeah.
I'm not native level.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing to
Ish.
clarify too. As adult learners, native level is basically impossible. The goal obviously is near native, right? And near native doesn't mean you're native either, right?
Yeah,
It's
no.
just you can speak and like kind of come off native, but you're still going to sound like a foreign speaker. There's times sometimes when I'm speaking like in voice chat with some random person I met like in game. So I'll tell them, I'll be like, oh, just so you know, I'm like a foreigner.
Yeah, and they'll be like, what?
And then like we'll be speaking in Korean. They'll be like, "Are you like really? You're not Korean?" Like I'm like, obviously I sound foreign. Like my pronunciation is not perfect. Like
I guess for a comparison, it would be like you just don't think of the possibility that the person you're talking with could be anything but a Korean.
Yeah.
So if they make mistakes, you just think, oh, they don't speak Korean perfectly.
Yeah.
But of course they're Korean.
Yeah.
Oh, I make mistakes too. So if you've already left a comment, you can edit it with your thoughts as well about all of the stuff we've talked about. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, no
Forrest.
problem. Always a pleasure.
If you have any questions as well, make sure to leave those in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time. 그럼
그럼
다음에 또 봐. 한국 사람인 줄 알았어.
어!
한국 사람 아니요?
아니에요. 저 미국 사람인데요.